Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Good to be with you all. I want to talk about something particularly topical today. There is a lot of exposure happening in the world at the moment. And when I was really feeling into the episode today, I thought we can't just skip that. We can't just pretend that that's not happening and that that's not drastically shaping the cultural narrative. It's not drastically showing where the shadows are in society. But like all of these big collective events, there's always something in it for us personally too. And I'm not talking about literally. I'm talking about symbolically, metaphorically, subconsciously. And this is really what I want to bring to the episode today, because the thing that I know, having worked with the shadow for a really, really, really long time, is that the exposure of shadow rarely comes up pretty. Okay, so whether that's collectively, whether that's personally, often when we start to expose and shine that light of consciousness onto something that's been hidden for so long, often it comes out quite turbulent. It comes up dressed in scandal, all right? It comes out as projection and splitting, and it can come across as not very spiritual, right? Because it's so messy and it's chaotic. And I'm doing the not very spiritual in bunny ears because I think the temptation sometimes in the spiritual community is to bypass this stuff, to not look at it directly in the eye, to sort of love and light it away, whereas actually this is a profoundly spiritual process that we're going through at the moment in the world. So I really want to talk about how this episode and what I'm about to share today kind of links back to my previous episode as well around this time of change and transition that we're all going through. But specifically, what does this mean for us personally as individuals, of course, but also as practitioners and coaches in our own right too? Because the reality is that when we shine that light of consciousness, whether that is out there in the external world, into the collective, or whether we shine that light of consciousness internally, it's going to disrupt what's been held in secrecy. So this is what I want to really bring to life today. But first, let me go back to my previous point, which is this is a profoundly spiritual process and time that we're going through right now. And just as much as an individual has to do their own shadow work, okay, we all have to do this. Many of us have been on a shadow work journey in some way, shape, or form. Just as we must integrate our dark side to become whole, likewise, society has to recognize all of its own repressed and destructive tendencies, all of the secrecy, the abuse, the greed, the racism, the systemic violence, all of that sort of stuff has to be seen, has to be acknowledged in order for us to heal. Okay? So going back to what I was saying about the spiritual community, this level of exposure that we're seeing, and let me name it, so let's talk about specifically the Epstein files, okay? This level of exposure, it breaks through all of the toxic positivity, okay, that's out there, the love and light, the spiritual bypassing, okay? We need to kind of move beyond that, because what that does, that spiritual bypassing, is that it uses spiritual principles essentially to avoid dealing with the negative stuff, the hard stuff. Oh, well, that's not high vibe. That's a bit low frequency. All right. We can't give energy to it. All right. But this confrontation with reality, the confrontation with the darkness sometimes, that is what true spirituality is. It's about accepting the full range of humanity. And that what's happening right now is happening for a reason. It's to flush out the shadow and ultimately heal. So when this happens, and this is to link it back a little bit to the conversation we had on the last episode, this breakdown of societal and cultural and political illusions, if you like, it can really spark that collective awakening. Remember how I said on the last episode that there are a lot of people waking up right now? That's absolutely true. And I think we've seen that more and more, particularly over the last 5 years in particular. I would say there's been another collective awakening really since the COVID era. I've seen a lot of people starting to wake up since that point. Many of us woke up in 2012, I think I shared last time, and others before that. But really, whenever these long-held, kind of harmful and shameful truths and this darkness is revealed, what happens is that it compels transformation. It compels transmutation. And it can be painful. And it can be really distasteful. And it can be really freaking ugly. As I said, when you drag a shadow into the light, it is going to be dragged there kicking and screaming. Okay? But a lot of people are waking up right now. Okay? So if we think about what's happening on the global stage at the moment, we're seeing this play out in real time. As I said, let's work with the example of the Epstein files in particular, because what we're seeing are secrets surfacing. Okay, if we look at the themes here, okay, there are secrets surfacing, things that were whispered or maybe sort of only just acknowledged in certain spaces. They're now being spoken aloud in front of a global audience on a global stage. People that were protected, institutions that were protected, they're being questioned. And guess what? People are refusing to shut up and let it go. Yeah? Institutions, politics, all of those kind of guardrails that we like to hang on to traditionally, they're starting to lose this moral authority. They're falling away. Leaders are being exposed as part of that. And what we're really seeing is that polarity is intensifying. Some people are very dismissive of what's going on. Others are absolutely enraged, and we're seeing this splitting that's happening. And what that means is that the collective shadow is on full display. We know that collective shadow is active when polarity hits the hardest, when there's group A versus group B, when there's tribalism, when there's infighting, when there are completely polar opposite opinions that are floating around out there. So the collective's reaction to all of this, and I promise to bring this into the personal in a moment, but this is really important. The collective's reaction to all of this is very volatile. Okay, as I said, we've seen outrage on one hand, we've seen denial on the other hand, we've seen fascination, we've seen fatigue, we've seen a lot of splitting going on about it. And so as this kind of collective volatility is happening, as people are waking up, their eyes are really being open to some of the darkness, some of the shadow that exists, and they're also starting to turn inwards as a result of that too. I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but for now I just want to pin that, because as people go through an awakening, not only do their eyes open to the cultural issues in the world at large, their eyes begin to turn inwards to themselves too. And that's where this conversation becomes psychological. The collective, remember, the collective is not separate from the personal psyche. They are intertwined deeply. So what we're witnessing on the external stage deeply mirrors something within each and every single human, not literally, of course, but symbolically. And I want to come back to that, okay? But what I wanted to sort of weave into this conversation next is the year of the fire horse, okay? There's a lot of very rich symbolism now. So we're entering the year of the fire horse. I think actually we entered it a couple of days ago at the time I'm recording this podcast. And it's really kind of started with a bit of a hot flash, quite a literal hot flash in my in my personal experience as a woman of a certain age, but that's not the point. But the reality is it's come in as this kind of hot flash of energy. And it couldn't be a more appropriate symbol for what's taking place collectively right now, if you notice that. So there's no irony to this, okay? This is deeply symbolic. And whether or not you follow astrology or Chinese astrology, many people are talking about how the year of the fire horse really symbolizes that energy and momentum and spiritedness and kind of really just taking charge and going for it. And I love that energy. I love that so much. All of that is very true, by the way. But one of the lesser discussed themes of the fire horse is volatility. Yeah, surprise, surprise. Volatility is also part of this fire horse energy. Now, notice that we tend to associate the term volatility with danger. Okay, so let me take a little moment here to talk about this term because I think it's really important and it will link back to the discussion generally. So we tend to associate volatility with danger. All right, so we think about markets, stock markets, okay, substances. If you're into chemistry, there are volatile substances and gases, okay. There are volatile tempers psychologically. But really, what volatility means is it's the capacity for rapid and unpredictable, quite sudden change. That's actually the true meaning of volatility, although we've kind of associated it with this negativity. So, at its core, when we think about volatility being this sudden and unpredictable change, at its core, volatility is a very, very revealing energy. A very revealing energy. It shakes loose stuff. It exposes things that are already broken, things that are already cracking or maybe festering beneath the surface. So if you think about it, let me just bring this to life with an example. If you think about like the energy markets, all right, it's a really boring example, but it's very important. Think about energy markets. So when the price of oil or gas or electricity surge or they change unpredictably, which many of us have experienced over the last several years, what that reveals typically are things like supply chain bottlenecks, the dependency of a country on a specific source of that energy, and maybe that is unreliable, that source. It exposes things like geopolitical risks. It exposes instability. Likewise, again, psychologically, just to bring this down a level too, volatility and conflict, all right? If we think about conflict, often when we're in conflict with a partner, possibly ourselves, okay, or in another relationship, usually it reveals hidden truths. It reveals long suppressed emotions that aren't typically visible during calmer times. Volatility is an immensely catalyzing and revealing energy at its core. But the very curious thing, and we think about the year ahead, okay, and the volatility energy of the fire horse too, there's also a very specific duality to it. So let's rewind a little bit. The universal law of polarity, okay, we know it says that everything in the universe has an opposite. It's got a dual pole, okay? There's hot, there's cold, there's light, there's dark, all right? So everything has its opposite. So volatility in itself is not dangerous, as I said. It's just simply an energy, right? Just like temperature is an energy and it can express as hot, it can express as cold, all right? And so depending on how volatility expresses means that it can have a light or a dark impact. So the darkness is exactly what we're seeing in the world at the moment. We're seeing the chaos, we're seeing the destruction and the collapse, the splitting, possibly even the danger element too. This is what we're seeing right now. But on the light aspect of volatility, it also gives us the potential, the rapid growth, the evolution, the alchemy, the realignment, the liberation, all of those good, juicy, catalyzing things. Going back to what I was saying about the deep and profound spiritual time that we're in at the moment requires this level of exposure and volatility, because this is how we heal, all right? That lightness, that potential, that evolution is hot on the heels of this volatile time that we're in. When light reveals something that was so deeply hidden, it can be disruptive, it can be chaotic, it can feel collapsing, but it's also potentially, if we allow it, it's the beginning of integration as well. It's the beginning of healing and wholeness. Now, let me bring this down to the personal for a minute. So very conscious that there is a bigger collective cultural story playing out here, okay? We've spoken a little bit about the fire horse. We've spoken a bit about the Epstein files. We've spoken about the energies that are out there at the moment. But remember, whatever is universal is personal and vice versa. That is the universal law of correspondence. So there is a link between your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs, your inner reality, and your external experiences and environment. That's the universal law of correspondence. So again, this doesn't mean literally, it means symbolically. So the collective mirrors the psyche mirrors the collective. Yeah? Polarity that's happening out there in the world, chaos that happens out there in the world, can mirror our own fragmentation. Exposure out there can mirror our own confrontation internally, our self-confrontation. Okay, so volatility out there often mirrors some degree of volatility inside as well. And so our own volatility, let's just kind of give some examples to this. It could look like secrets surfacing. There's so many people that I'm speaking to at the moment that are really starting to admit certain secrets that they've been keeping. They're talking a little bit more about past stuff. They're talking a little bit about unspoken truths. Yeah? Areas of misalignment being flushed out. Hey, guess what? When you admit a hard truth to yourself, it's very, very, very difficult to hang on to areas of misalignment. Old identities are collapsing. There's a lot of conflict as well, potentially, that's happening in people's worlds. The inner critics are getting louder. The nervous system can feel a little on guard and edgy and a little overwhelmed. So we're noticing this personal volatility too. Okay, as people wake up, that makes a lot of sense, right? They're starting to notice areas of their life that aren't quite in alignment anymore. Old identities falling away. New ones aren't quite formed yet. And so again, here is the invitation to keep on the spiritual invitation theme from last episode. The invitation is that moments of personal volatility, they invite greater integration. They invite greater alignment and coherence. People are less willing right now to become divided from themselves. They're searching for meaning and truth and alignment. They want that coherence, okay? But this is a deeply uncomfortable and a confronting process. And even if you are someone who has been on a spiritual or personal development journey for many years now, I have no doubt that you've got your own version of this too. This isn't just for the newbies that are waking up. There are always layers to this. There are always layers to the psyche. There are always little unexplored areas of the psyche too. And so remember, going back to what I said before, that when the light enters the shadow, the first experience is rarely comfort, isn't it? It can feel really disruptive. It can feel a little volatile. It can feel like a little bit, oh, I don't like this, because, evolution and growth rarely are feel-good moments. So to link this back to the fire horse, okay, let me just close the loop on that. The fire horse is all about, yes, momentum, yes, energy, yes, light, yes, volatility in some respects too. But it also has that element of fire, and fire is all about illumination, purification. It exposes. But the horse element is all about the momentum, and specifically the momentum of what's already in motion. Okay? So if we look at all of the stuff that's coming out now, everything is being exposed, and then looking at our own personal journeys too, things that might be coming up to the surface for us to look at, there is going to be a continued momentum to that, and quite quickly. And now it's, not trying to predict any sort of future chaos or anything like that, okay? But I think we can expect to see the amplification of issues collectively, certainly, but also personally too. People are turning to shadow work. People are turning to inner work here. Because again, when we start shining the light of consciousness, whatever has been hidden, it becomes very, very hard to sustain. Can't live in darkness anymore. And likewise, when momentum increases, okay, things begin to amplify. Whatever is unstable or unhealthy or hidden, it's going to surface more quickly. It's revealed. Yeah. So I want to just kind of pause here for a minute, because I'm very conscious that it feels like a big link, okay? It feels like a big link between what's happening collectively and potentially what's happening internally with us, but also with our clients. If you think about coaching clients, people who come into your practice, future clients too, they're also going through this, all right? But exposure and revelation aren't things to be feared, okay? This is why we got to be, and this is the fire horse energy too, we're going to look this in the face. Because sunlight and light generally is the best disinfectant. Yeah. It's the opportunity for us and our clients to move into a period of real healing and real growth, collectively, personally. Okay, all of the things. So remember, okay, the chaos, exposure, volatility, none of that actually invents the problem. Like, go back to the energy market, okay? Just because the energy markets are volatile, it doesn't mean that it's creating the problem, okay? It just shows the cracks. It just reveals the fact that we're too dependent on a particular supplier, for example, or there's a bottleneck, all right? So volatility and chaos expose the cracks. And if that's true collectively, again, going back to the universal law of correspondence, it's also true psychologically. And so the question becomes, where do those cracks live within us? Where do those cracks live within us? This is really hard and this is really brave work. This is the basis and the foundation of real shadow work. And a really helpful way of understanding it, I wanted to bring in a little different model this week. I know I talk a lot about Jung and his model of the psyche, okay, but I wanted to bring in a concept, some of you may have heard of it, called the Johari Window. And this was a model, it's a heuristic model, okay? It was developed in 1955 by two psychologists, okay? A guy called Joseph Luft and a guy called, Harrington Ingham, okay? And what this does is it really helps give people a model and an understanding of themselves, but also to understand their relationships with others as well. And so if you think about the Johari window, okay, it suggests that there are four parts of us. So the first part is what's known and visible, all right? And so that's typically like our persona mask, all right? So perhaps we're a really warm person, we're a really bubbly and bright and caring person, okay? That's the thing that's known about us. We know it about us. Other people know about us. It's visible. People see it every single day. We see it when we look in the mirror, okay? These are the accepted parts of who we are. But the second part of this are the parts that we keep hidden. Because if you think about it, who we are isn't on full display all the time. We keep things back. We keep things to ourselves. And this probably links into a little bit more of the ego self, all right? So the ego, again, it's not necessarily the mask that we wear, but it's all of our internal processes in terms of our personality, our labels, who we believe ourselves to be, our beliefs, okay? And so perhaps, for example, there's a quiet part of us that we keep hidden that's maybe quietly ambitious or maybe really impatient, but we don't like to let people know that we're impatient, right? So we like to keep that hidden to ourselves, right? The third part are the parts that are blind to us, but obvious to others. So this is a very interesting one, and this can be the start of shadow work, all right? So this is the stuff that we have no idea about ourselves, but someone else, our partner, our colleagues at work, our boss, or our family can say, oh yeah, like you're totally a magnetic communicator. You're a great leader. You're really inspiring. But we don't necessarily see that about ourselves. Got it? So they're the sort of parts of us that we can't quite accept yet or get our heads around, but they just naturally emanate from us, but we don't necessarily have the level of awareness yet to accept those as part of ourselves. Right? And this is why shadow work is such a mirror, right? We often need other people to reflect back to us what we can't see. And that's not just through feedback, it's through projection and things like that too. But it's really, the parts of us that are blind to us, but obvious to others, which then leads us to the fourth and the deepest quadrant, the deepest part of ourselves, which is the unknown unknown. And this is shadow territory. The stuff that we don't know about ourselves, the stuff that other people don't know about ourselves, the stuff that's just completely in the dark. That is pure shadow. Okay, so when everyone talks about, oh, I've done shadow work before, and oh, I know I have a bit of a temper on me, oh, that's my shadow. Not necessarily, because you know about that. The shadow is the stuff that you actually are unconscious to. By very definition, the shadow is unconscious. We don't know it's there. So this is the part where the shadow lives. It's the places that we've never really consciously examined because we don't really know that it's there. It's all of the assumptions that maybe we've never really questioned before. And perhaps it's the impulses that silently kind of operate in the background too. But it's this shadow aspect of the self. And it's really important because we know that the unknown unknown, the shadow, drives so much of our behavior. So we might see ourselves repeating patterns. We might see ourselves, love is a really good example. If we're dating, it's like, why am I attracting the same sort of person in a different body, basically? Like, what's going on here? What is that? There's an unconscious repetitive pattern there. Got it? Maybe there's also something around your conflict style as well. Perhaps you're someone who's done a lot of professional development, a lot of personal growth, but you still have trouble controlling your temper in conflict. Perhaps you're someone who just gets really triggered or rageful. Okay, you fly off the handle, right? We see this sometimes. Sometimes there can be some shadow there too. Right? Big repressed emotions coming to the surface. Again, all shadow. And so that unknown unknown, that's really the call to shadow work, to get to know that part of us. Because when we get to know that part of us, we get to understand our limitations. We also get to understand, and this is the other part of the unknown unknown, we get to know our secret gifts. Our secret gifts and our brightness and boldness often lives in that shadow too, and we can't see it. Yeah. So when we think about the unknown unknown and it begins to surface, all right, we're starting to ask all of these big questions about our lives. We're going deeper into our journey. We're seeing what's happening on the global stage at the moment, all right. We're kind of accelerating our contact with it. We're asking questions. We're turning our attention inwards. Our eyes are turning inwards. And when that begins to surface, right, and there are various tools that I share with people in the Psychodynamic Coach Academy. This is one of the areas that we look at in great amount of detail, obviously. But when we begin to see and notice and know what to look for and know when the shadow is surfacing, we tend to have a choice. Option A is that we collapse into defensiveness and resistance and projection and outrage. Okay, we see that happening on the world stage at the moment. We do the same thing. All right, it's like, no, that's not part of me. I absolutely reject and resist that part of myself. There's no way. We can collapse into defensiveness around our shadow, or we can grow our capacity to actually hold what we discover. Because when we discover it, when we bring that into the light of consciousness, it might be uncomfortable, but actually there's so much opportunity and growth there. So much opportunity for transformation to become our whole selves. So integration is really about wholeness. Sometimes people say, what even is integration? Integration is about wholeness, alignment, coherence between our conscious parts, the parts of us that are known and visible, the parts that we keep hidden, and the parts that we have absolutely no freaking idea about. That's what integration is. It's about bringing the conscious and the unconscious together. Yeah. So making contact with the shadow isn't about feeling bad about ourselves. It's not about condemnation or trying to be perfect, polishing ourselves to within an inch of our lives. No, it's about wholeness. It's kind of reducing that gap between who we believe ourselves to be, the warm, bubbly, caring person, and who we actually are, because that's not the full picture. Your personality and your persona masks, not the full picture. It's part of you. But what else don't you know? What about that bold magnetic communicator? What about that inspiring energy that you have absolutely no idea you possess? Likewise, what about the part of you that could be, a little bit unfeeling, a little bit kind of cold sometimes? There's wisdom in that. That's going to help you set better boundaries. That's going to help you really stand up for yourself. Okay, so this is the thing. It's not about trying to be perfect. And sometimes I see people approach shadow work as this kind of trying to be perfect, all right? Or kind of almost a way to just sort of be in the self-condemnation and the kind of the shame and to swim in the dark a little bit. We don't want to do that either. This is about wholeness. It's about coherence. That's what integration is. Bridging that gap between who we believe we are and who we actually are. There's a push-pull tension there, okay? If we've grown up and we've thought, this is our personality, this is who I am, these are my labels, I'm the warm, bubbly people pleaser, I'm that person that does anything for anybody. That's not the full picture. And this is obviously part of the work that we do in the Psychodynamic Coach Academy too. We do this first with ourselves. We have to be able to see ourselves clearly. And there's always work and layers to this, of course, right? But then we learn how to guide others with that too. Because as people's eyes are turning inwards, as things are feeling more volatile externally, as things are feeling more volatile internally in people's lives, this is the work that they're looking to do. Remember that ancient impulse I spoke about in the last episode of knowing thyself, to know thyself deeply. That's the work of our times. That's where people are coming right now. And we've seen that. And if you haven't listened to last week's episode, dive in and take a look at that, because I talk about not just sort of the mythology and the story around that and the kind of the energetics of that. I also talk about facts, okay, how this industry is growing, how it's projected to grow, what we're seeing in terms of those patterns as well. All right, people are wanting to do this work, okay? So this is really important when we think about the start of this conversation, okay? I know I've taken you on a little bit of a journey today, but if we think about this age of exposure that we're in, we can continue, to be outraged, and we should be, okay, all right, but we don't want to be outraged to the point where we're ineffective. We don't want to get swept along in the chaos and the disorder and the continually being triggered. What's actually being asked of us, what the spiritual invitation is in this, is for us individually to become more coherent, to become more whole ourselves first. Because when we are coherent, when we have integrated enough, we begin to impact the collective in a better, clearer, more powerful, more useful way. We see this. We see people getting triggered into moral superiority and, outrage, as I said, or people even just dissociate from it. And so much of that is completely understandable, right? It really is. But when we actually do the work ourselves to look at our own inner fragmentation, our own unknown, our own secrets, our own stuff that we've kept hidden, light stuff, dark stuff, what that does is it creates a really robust, powerful individual that can stand up for causes they believe in, that can have and engage in conversations in a way that is calm and clear and powerful, okay? Rather than just being swept into tribalism and dissociation or moral superiority, because we don't get anywhere if we continue that. That just perpetuates the shadow. If we don't integrate our shadow personally, we continue to project it out there onto the people we dislike, onto the perpetrators, onto all of the things, okay? But what this allows us to do is be fortified as individuals first, so we can take a stand, so we can contribute, as I said, to the collective conversation in a way that is powerful versus just outraged and emotional and all over the shop. Okay? So this is the work of our times. The age of exposure is here. Okay, the volatility is here. The fire horse is here. That's going to keep burning things up. All right, but what the real invitation is underneath this is about integration. That is the work of our times. That requires depth. That requires structure. And that requires an ability and a willingness, okay, to work with these forces, these conflicting and dynamic forces within us, to work with the shadow responsibly. And so this is exactly why I created the Psychodynamic Coach Academy. Now, sometimes people say, is this just another mindset course? Okay. Is this just like a one of those life coaching certifications that's just sort of more about mindset? No, it's not. All right. So this is my 16-week structured, internationally accredited training in how to work with shadow, those unconscious drivers, okay, in the body, ethically, professionally, within a coaching framework, okay? And this is where we have the chance to really learn a toolkit to not just help ourselves and to go deeper, but to really support our clients too, the people whose eyes are turning inwards, the ones who are starting to really come into this industry in an attempt to know themselves better, okay, to become stronger leaders, better partners, better parents. They don't do that by slapping on a mindset band-aid, by doing affirmations. They do that by knowing themselves deeply. And to know ourselves deeply and completely, we have to become familiar with the unknown unknown. And that's exactly what we cover in the PCA. So just quick announcement, early bird enrollment is currently open throughout February for the next cohort, which starts in March. So March 30th, we get started. But as I said, you've got opportunity to save $1,500 on your enrollment throughout February as we go through our early bird enrollment stage. Okay, so if you feel called, if you've been on the fence around this training for a while, now's the time to step in, okay? Because we're going to see more and more of this momentum this year. And it's time to sort of to jump on that, all right? To really learn the skills, to take yourself deeper, to take your clients deeper, to learn a robust coaching framework that's going to really support people at the level of the unknown unknown, okay? This is going to really support you personally, but also professionally too. Okay, so the details are always linked up around this episode. So you can check out our website. You can find all of the details around pricing, our pricing options, there's payment plans, there are FAQs, all of the information is on our program page. So if it's calling you, highly recommend you go check it out. Any questions, you're welcome to email me, or better yet, if you'd like to discuss joining the program, book a free consultation call directly from the program page, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with you for 40 minutes, and we can talk about whether this is the right fit for you, make sure your questions are answered, and all of those things, okay? So until next time, take care of yourself out there, all right? Be good, be well, and hopefully we'll see you again very, very soon. Take care.